Sometimes life hands you a burden that becomes a blessing, though Walter Greavves could hardly see it that way when the letter arrived. At 42, Walter's life was a grind of night shifts and aching bones, pushing mop buckets through office corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair. His hands were stained from industrial cleaners, his back bent from years of labor, and his wallet stayed thin despite the endless work. Every evening, when his son Theo curled up in their cramped apartment, reading adventure books by the flickering kitchen light, Walter told himself all the sacrifice was worth it. But deep down, he feared he had nothing more to give his boy than a legacy of exhaustion. That Tuesday morning in March, however, everything changed. Theo, just 12 years old, knocked on his father's bedroom door, holding an envelope as though it contained a treasure. It bore the letterhead of an Iowa law firm, Whitmore and Associates. Inside, the words blurred together in legal formality, but the meaning was undeniable. Walter had inherited an estate from a great uncle he'd never heard of, a man named Cornelius Greavves. The estate wasn't money, it was something stranger, something heavier. A museum. The Meridian Museum of Natural and Cultural History. Along with it came 30 acres of land and an ominous handwritten note. Walter, though we never met, I believe you'll understand the value of things others overlook. The key to everything lies in room 23B. Trust your son's instincts. Children see what adults miss. Walter felt both confusion and dread. A janitor inheriting a museum, it seemed absurd, but Theo's eyes shone like lanterns in the dark. To him, this wasn't a burden. This was the start of an adventure. 3 weeks later, they arrived in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with their lives packed into a beat-up Honda Civic. The museum stood on a hill overlooking the Wapsipinicon River, a Gothic limestone giant cloaked in ivy. Its copper dome had long turned green with age, its windows shuttered, its steps worn. To Walter, it was a money pit waiting to collapse, but Theo pressed his face to the window and whispered, "It's like a castle." The heavy oak door groaned as Walter pushed it open, revealing a grand hall where dust motes swirled in beams of sunlight. Glass cases sat empty, labels faded. A stuffed bison glared blindly at intruders, and a staircase curved upward like something out of a forgotten fairy tale. Yet the building was not simply abandoned. It was waiting. Room 23B, as the letter had promised, was tucked away on the second floor. Inside, Walter found a mahogany desk, a spidery note, and an old brass key with a six-pointed head. The museum closed in 1943, the note explained. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Watch your boy. He will show you what you need to see. That night at a local diner, they learned the townsfolk remembered Cornelius fondly but whispered about mysteries. Rumors swirled of government projects, wartime secrets, and treasures hidden away. Theo, undeterred, filled notebooks with sketches of exhibits they could create. Walter saw only debt and decay, but when he looked at his son's hopeful face, he agreed to stay. They would at least try to uncover what Cornelius had left behind. What they found would change their lives forever. On the third day inside the museum, Theo carried a toy hammer, a birthday gift he'd suddenly taken to using like a detective's wand. In the east wing, he tapped against a plaster wall that sounded different, hollow. Walter leaned in, skeptical, until a hairline crack betrayed a hidden outline. With one blow too many, the plaster crumbled and cool air rushed out from the darkness beyond. Behind the wall was a secret chamber, sealed since 1943. They widened the opening and stepped inside, flashlights cutting through decades of silence. The room was filled with treasures, paintings wrapped in cloth, crates stamped in foreign languages, glass cases shrouded in sheets. Against the far wall stood an oak door covered in strange carved symbols, its lock almost begging for Cornelius's ornate brass key. "Dad," Theo whispered, "this is what he meant." But before Walter could test the key, footsteps echoed from the main hall. Someone else was in the museum. The steps grew closer, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't calling out, weren't hiding either. Walter killed the light, pulling Theo into the shadows. Breath held, they listened as the intruder paused near the cracked wall, inspecting their handiwork. Minutes stretched like hours before the steps retreated. The intruder left, but the message was clear. They were not alone in this discovery. Someone else knew the Meridian Museum's secret, and someone else wanted what was hidden within its walls. Back in room 23B, Walter and Theo dug through drawers and filing cabinets, uncovering documents that made their hands shake. Shipping manifests written in German, stamped with TH. With the chilling word, confiscated. Letters from 1943 detailing intercepted Nazi loot, artwork stolen from Jewish families, artifacts seized from museums across Europe, treasures meant to be smuggled to the United States for safekeeping. Cornelius and his circle, calling themselves the archivists, had rescued them, hiding cultural treasures to preserve them until the world was ready. Theo's wide eyes glistened as he whispered, they were saving history. But salvation came with danger. Their research was interrupted by a knock at the front door. An elderly man in a tailored suit introduced himself as Harrison Blackwood, representing certain interested parties. His offer was simple, $2 million cash for the museum and all its contents. Walter was staggered. $2 million could free him from every debt, give Theo the life he dreamed of. But Blackwood's smile was too smooth, his eyes too sharp. When Walter hesitated, Blackwood warned that opportunities like this didn't come twice. After he left, Theo said quietly, "It's not just about the money, is it?" Walter realized his son was right. The treasures weren't theirs to sell. They belonged to history, to families long gone, to cultures scarred by war. But now Blackwood knew, and danger was closing in. The next day, desperate for answers, they sought out Margaret Chen, a retired professor whose grandmother had worked at the museum. Her home was filled with photographs of the Meridian in its prime, bustling with scholars and visitors. Margaret listened as Walter and Theo explained their discovery, then unlocked a portfolio her grandmother had left behind. Inside were photographs of the hidden chamber as it once was, not storage, but a preservation laboratory bustling with men and women cataloging artifacts. The archivists weren't thieves, Margaret explained. They were heroes saving culture from destruction. She told them about Cornelius, Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, and her own grandmother who had risked everything to rescue treasures from Nazi hands. But there were enemies then, and there are enemies now. She named them the shadow collectors, wealthy opportunists like Blackwood, who profited from displaced art and sought to keep treasures hidden in private collections forever. Margaret warned that Cornelius had left not just artifacts, but responsibility. The key Theo held was more than metal. It was the master key to an entire network of hidden sites across the Midwest, caches filled with preserved culture. Theo, piecing together coded messages hidden in paintings, confirmed it. The archivists hadn't left a single room. They debuilt a spiderweb of secret repositories across states, a map of memory stretching across rivers and towns. And now, Blackwood's people were watching. Guided by Margaret, Walter and Theo returned to the museum and opened the oak door with Cornelius's brass key. What lay beyond stunned them. Filing cabinets filled with meticulous records, maps covered in symbols, a scale model of the Meridian showing how Cornelius had envisioned it as a monument to humanity's resilience. And at the center, the master registry, a leather-bound catalog documenting every rescued artifact, every family it had been stolen from, and every hidden site where it had been stored. But this was not just history. The registry contained recent entries, artifacts from Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, evidence that the archivist network had survived and adapted through modern wars. Cornelius had not been the last guardian. They were part of something alive, global, still working in the shadows. As Walter opened the registry, a radio crackled to life. A voice with a German accent. "Cedar Falls Station, this is Munich. You are active again. Please confirm status." Margaret grabbed the microphone, announcing Walter as the new guardian. The archivists were real, worldwide, and they had just been reactivated. And with reactivation came urgency. The voice warned of shadow collectors' increasing activity in Iowa. "Activate preservation protocol," it commanded. Hidden panels slid open, revealing equipment, alarms, and maps glowing with connections. Walter realized this was no inheritance. It was a responsibility that spanned continents. That responsibility became deadly serious when FBI agents arrived, led by Sarah Rodriguez, head of cultural crimes. Cornelius's records, she explained, were the missing link in a case against Blackwood's shadow collectors, a criminal enterprise responsible for decades of looting across the globe. They weren't just dealers. They destabilized regions, prolonged wars, and infiltrated museums to steal heritage for profit. Blackwood was not a man offering money out of kindness. He was part of a network that thrived on erasing history. Walter felt the weight of his decision. He could walk away rich but complicit, or he could stand with his son and preserve what generations had fought to save. Theo had already chosen. With his sketches, his decoding, his boundless curiosity, he was becoming the very guardian Cornelius had foreseen. Margaret reminded Walter that preservation required courage, and as FBI sirens wailed outside, Walter knew this was no longer about his own exhaustion or debts. It was about standing between the past and those who would destroy it. The preservation protocol was in their hands. The archivist network had awakened, and Blackwood's empire of shadows was closing in for the fight of its life. The final decision came as headlights filled the hill and Blackwood's convoy approached. Walter held the archivist's medallion, a symbol Cornelius had carried for 40 years, and turned to his son. "Theo, this is your adventure now. You've seen what I couldn't." Together, they activated the protocol. Across the globe, stations lit up. Tokyo, Cairo, Mexico City, Berlin, voices of guardians who had waited for this moment. The archivists were no longer a secret. They were a movement, and Walter and Theo were at its heart. As Blackwood's men tried to breach the museum, FBI agents swarmed and international allies rallied. Walter understood that Cornelius hadn't left him a burden. He had given him a purpose, one Theo would carry forward. The museum was no longer a crumbling relic. It was a fortress of memory, a place where stolen voices could finally be heard again. And as Walter told his son to keep sketching, keep decoding, keep dreaming, he realized their lives had changed forever. Now, dear listener, ask yourself, if you inherited a secret like this, would you protect it? Would you risk everything to defend the past for the sake of the future? If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow I have another tale, one just as unbelievable, waiting for you.